You can start. Good morning. Welcome to Forums That Matter. That's a community service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. I'm Ed Covington, and I'm the coordinator of today's discussion, which has both remote and in-person audiences. Our topic today is, if we make gender diversity materials available to kids, are there consequences? We'll have Q&A from about 9:30 till 10, and a microphone will be passed around to the in-person audience, courtesy of Jan Devereaux. And our virtual audience can ask questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of their screen. Closed captions have been enabled, and those of you who want to can turn them on or off at home. Please be sure your phones are off or in airplane mode. The program is recorded, and it'll be available in a few days on our website at uucleveland.org. So it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, who has generously agreed to share her time and expertise with us, of which there's plenty. Vanessa Jensen, PsyD, is a psychologist at Cleveland Clinics Center for Pediatric Behavioral Health, where she directs the GUIDE program that provides care for gender nonconforming youth and young adults. She's been an activist in gender issues for decades, has testified before the Ohio legislature on this issue, and served on the Geauga County Board of Mental Health and Recovery Services, where she supported compassionate policies. Vanessa, thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to try to see if I can figure out how to turn my slides on. Share screen to this one. Here we go. Aha, good. I don't know if you want to turn off the front lights a little bit so you can see a little better either way. My name is Vanessa Jensen. I was a longtime Shaker resident, neighbor of Ed, and worked with Ed and his wife for more years than either of us probably wants to count. I now live out in the boondocks in the country in Geauga County on a little farm. Friends who know me from my days in leadership at the clinic are like, "You live on a farm? Gotta be kidding." Those are the days when we all wore suits to work every day and were required to wear pantyhose and high heels. You can tell now I'm not wearing them. So I work a lot with gender diverse individuals. I've been, call me an activist. I always kind of cringe at that word a little bit, but generally a supporter of LGBT issues long before I had kids. Not because it was a personal investment, but because it was the right thing to do. We know a lot about the science, and some we don't know. We'll talk about today about what leads people to feel differently about their gender or their sexual orientation, sexual attraction. But things like the word sex just never got talked about before. Those are words that, at least growing up for me, was not something you learned about except to say, don't do it. And that was the extent of our sex education. And genders were male and female. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is a little background and language. A lot of this, many of you, I'm making a few assumptions about the population here and the way you view things, but I'll give a quick overview of some terms and then talk about what we know and what we don't know. So in terms of gender, we have the gender unicorn, probably seen this before. So I'll start at the top. Gender identity has always been you're a male or you're a female. Okay, that was what it was. Now we recognize that there are maybe a couple other options. There have always been women who didn't really stereotypically act like women. There have always been men that didn't fit the stereotyped macho guy. It was all still felt like you still had to pick a box, one or the other. Increasingly in culture, we've realized that maybe you don't have to pick a box. Maybe there's people who don't fit either box. The labels you hear now are things like gender non-binary, gender fluid. We can talk about the pros and cons of that, but that's where things are. Gender expression, I'm going to skip for now. Sex assigned at birth. I'm going to focus on that one. How do we decide if a baby is a boy or girl?
The genitalia.
Their genitalia. That's pretty much it. You know, in the initial days of ultrasound, it was if we could find a penis, and I'm being very blunt, I use a lot of direct language. The old days of ultrasound, when you didn't get a very good picture, if they found a penis, it was a boy. If they didn't, it was a girl. And sometimes you got a surprise. because a leg was folded the wrong way and it was hidden. Now it's much more detailed. Now they can look not just for a penis, but for a vagina, for ovaries, for testicles, and well, not necessarily testicles, but because they're kind of hidden. But they can look for specific features to be clear. Sometimes babies are born with external genitalia that looks one way, but their internal organs don't match. What do we do with them? So now we know that there are babies born that have mixed male and female features. And that's a whole different discussion. That's one of my other specialties. Kids with disorders of sex development, or is also called intersex. And that's a different discussion, but it's made us think about, wow, maybe there's not just male, female, and maybe it's not just genitals. And then gender expression is the idea of how you express yourself. You know, I'm dressed today pretty casually. I can also dress in a ball gown and look really girly. Men can dress in different ways. And we encourage, in the journey of gender, we encourage kids to first start with gender expression, to play with gender. Many of you may have colored your hair at some point or cut your hair in different ways. It's playing with your hair because you can. Just like that, people can play with clothing and makeup and nails, jewelry, to begin to express themselves in different ways. And that's one way that we encourage kids a lot to begin to explore their gender, is by expressing themselves in different ways. Separate from those three things about gender is the issue of attraction. Now, sexual orientation and gender identity, which we'll see in the later slide, really have nothing to do with each other, even though they get lumped together in this LGBTQ acronym. And we'll talk about that a little later. And then there's now a new one you'll hear about. There's sexual attraction and there's emotional attraction. For many of us, I hate to sound so old, for many of us, it's sort of the same thing. But think about if you've ever had what I used to jokingly call an emotional affair with someone. So you're married, you're monogamous, but there's a person of your other gender that you're attracted. If you're married, I'm female, married to a man. Maybe there's another man that I have a really intense emotional relationship with that feels almost like a sexual relationship, but it's not sex. It's just a very intense emotional attraction to that person, a long-term friendship. So there can be this thing called, I don't know what that is, emotional attraction that may not necessarily cross over with sex, but that's another discussion. So I'm going to go to the next slide if I can do that. So gender terms, we just talked about these. Gender really is a social construct. It's who you are as a person and how you feel about your maleness, femaleness. Gender identity, gender expression, we talked about. Gender dysphoria is when somebody has a very significant, and I'm not talking about a little distress about, oh, having a period today or whatever, but a very significant distress in the sense that I have the body of a female and others see me as female, but I don't feel like that's right. And it can be very intense to the point where I've had even young kids try to cut off their genitals or threaten to cut off their breasts because it feels so wrong for them. Now, we're talking a small number of people, but for those people, it's very, very significant. Let's see if I can get to the next one. So in terms of genders, there's cisgender. I'm making a little bit of an assumption based on just numbers and statistics that most of you are cisgender, which means cis means same, which means you see yourself as the gender that you were born as and the genitals you were born with. So I'm a cisgender female. I was born female. I still see myself as female. It's hard for me to imagine being anything else. Transgender is a broad term that's used now. It's the T in the LGBT. It's often called the silent T, which is individuals who feel that they're something other than what they were born with. Just as in a lot of things, there are sort of two camps in the transgender world. There are those who are transgender that feel like they are not the gender they were born in. They are the other gender. They don't want anyone else to know. It's a private thing. They just want to be seen. If they were born Jane and now they're John, they just want to be a guy known as John. That's it. No flags, no purple flags, no announcement. They just want the world to know they're John. There are others who are somewhere either on the I'm not certain of my gender, or in the non-binary or the transgender, that are very strong activists and say, I want the world to know there's this thing called transgender. And I want the world to know I'm not just male or female. I am what I am. And I'm transgender. I'm a trans male. I'm a trans female. So trans male meaning I'm living as a male. And trans female means I am living as a female. Regardless of what I was born, I have now transitioned to that term. So people get confused sometimes. When you hear trans male, does that mean I'm male going to female, female going to male? If it's trans something, it means the gender that's there is the one that person is living in and feels. So if that helps clarify that. Non-binary are those who think that gender isn't binary. It's not just male and female. I'm something in between. Now you'll hear crazy things, people saying they're a unicorn, people saying they're an animal, they're a Martian. There's a lot of misinformation out there that you'll see on the internet about kids thinking they're cats and all kinds of crazy stuff. Most of that is internet hype and you can just ignore it. But there are people who feel very strongly that I just don't fit the classic male or female. I don't want to be called either because I'm in between. I'm non-binary or gender fluid, something else. And then there are individuals currently who say they're agender, which means I don't fit either, any gender. I don't know what I am. I'm just me. I don't want to be called either. Now, that's a pretty recent thing. Is it a trend? I don't know. We'll have to see where it goes. So as I said before, get rid of that little thing there. Okay, how do you get rid of little things? Get rid of little things. Okay, get rid of little things. So gender identity and sexual orientation are not at all related. What I mean is people often say, and I get a room of adults, I can say this, gender identity, we often say it's who you go to bed as, who you are in your soul, who are you in terms of maleness or femaleness. Sexual orientation is who do you go to bed with? Who do you want to go to bed with? Who are you attracted to? And those two may be unrelated. So if you're a trans male, again, you were born female, living as a male, and you're attracted to females, your sexual attraction is to females. It means you're a guy attracted to females, which means you're a heterosexual guy. That may seem confusing because you were a guy born as a girl, but you're living as a guy and you're attracted to females, you're a heterosexual guy. If you're a trans female, so you're living as female, you're attracted to women, it means you're gay or lesbian. And again, those are labels that people put on themselves. We don't put those on other people. Make sense so far? Okay, I'll get rid of that little thing again. Uh-oh. Oh dear, let me go back here. Screen sharing stopped. Let me go back to screen share. One more slide. Slideshow. And go forward. Okay, so here's the part I wanted to get to. Things we know and things we don't know. And this is where I'll talk a bit and then hopefully have more discussion. So in terms of how does this arise? How do people develop into male or female? Or how do people develop as transgender or gay or lesbian? And it really isn't just about genitals. And then we got to learning about chromosomes, probably back when we were all in school. There's XX and XY, right? XX is girls. You add a Y in there, you get to be a boy. But we found out over time, there are other combinations. There's XXX, there's XO, there's XYY, there's XXY, there's XXYYY. All these combinations, and what we discovered, and I'm using the royal we here as in the medical profession in general and research, that when you add these other combinations of X and Y chromosomes, gee whiz, some of those individuals seem to be more or less likely to show different gender identity or sexual orientations. So kids who were born XO tend to not have really any sexual attraction and not be sexual. I say kids, but then develop into people, obviously. Kids who are XXY tend to have certain patterns of behavior and identities. So maybe it's not just X and Y, but then we found that there are certain patterns of hormone exposure in utero. So if a child is bathed in utero for unknown reason, or sometimes for a reason, with extra androgens, which is the precursor to male hormones, such as in congenital adrenal hyperplasia, those kids are more likely to, those girls are more likely to be gay. They're still XX chromosome, they still have female genitalia, but they're more likely to grow up being homosexual. There are certain other issues where boys who grow up who have a disorder of androgen sensitivity, so their bodies don't absorb the androgens in utero, are more likely to grow up as gay men. So maybe it's not just chromosomes. And that's gotten very clear in the literature. So it's chromosomes, it's one thing. Secondly, the hormonal level in utero. There's also the hormone levels we all just have when we're born and as we grow up. If I tested every one of you in your male and female hormones at a certain age and a certain point for females in your menstrual cycle, it would be variable. Some would be higher in androgens, some would be lower. Some would be higher in estrogens, some would be lower. And it's not a clear pattern, but gee whiz, if we think about androgen as a male precursor to testosterone, that has to influence someone's behavior. We know that women who have higher androgen levels are more likely to be more, and I don't want to be so stereotyped, more likely to be in leadership, more likely to have more kind of what we typically call male characteristics. So some of those just aren't environment. But we know that environment in terms of how you're raised is one thing, but it has very little to do with someone's gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. So one of the things, for example, in terms of this discussion of is exposing kids to different genders and sexual information going to affect them. One of the things that was studied a long time ago that I talked about when I testified in the Ohio Senate on a bill that was saying gay couples shouldn't be allowed to raise children is one of the few areas there's been some really good research is the outcome of children raised in two-parent homes that are two different genders, your standard mom, papa, versus gay couples. And in terms of outcome for those children, absolutely no significant difference in their mental health, their intellectual development, their social development, except one thing. Kids raised with two parents of the same sex were more likely to have higher empathy and higher tolerance for people who were different. Now, as I testified in the House, I hope for my kids that's how they grew up. And I didn't have kids at that point, my imaginary children. I hope that's how they grew up. So it does, being around gay people doesn't increase the incidence of gayness. I didn't add that those kids did not have any more higher likelihood of being gay than anybody else. In fact, there were equal numbers of those kids in that population raised by gay parents that were gay as there were in the heterosexual parents. So straight parents have gay kids, gay parents have some gay kids. Most kids are not gay. So we know that. On the same idea is, why would we think that learning about that there are gay people in the world would make kids gay? As Dr. Covington said, I was briefly on the Geauga County Mental Health Board. You can look it up someday if you want to have a good laugh. I managed it about 8 months. before I very publicly retired from that and put that, it got published in the paper, because I was accused of being a witch. And I was accused of creating an army of transgenders. My response at first was like, if I was that damn powerful, I'd create an army of something, but I don't know if I can do that. I don't have that much control over anything. So we know that being exposed to being gay, being exposed to gay people, being exposed to gay teachers is no more likely to make someone gay than being exposed to a heterosexual teacher is going to make someone heterosexual. It doesn't work that way. How many of you ever asked your teacher who they had sex with? I certainly didn't. You know, it's just not what you do. And it's none of the students' business in general. It just doesn't make a difference. How many of you read books like Catcher in the Rye or Catch-22? Did that make you want to run out and have sex? Well, you're shaking your head. Yes, I know that.
They were good books.
They're phenomenal books. And kids are not blind. I mean, if you think about it, the number of things a typical 14-year-old now has seen on the internet is way more than they're ever going to read in Catcher in the Rye. You know, teens can't go online to search for something for their biology class about breast cancer and see pornography. You know, we underestimate kids and their ability to filter out nonsense. The teens I see, I sometimes feel like they're better at filtering out the garbage than I am. And they're not stupid. Now, it means parents do have to be more aware. It really is on parents to monitor their kids. I can give you a whole other discussion on what I teach parents about how to monitor online activities and things like that. You know, one of the things I'll say is, you know, people often say, well, how come so many kids are now transgender? Well, is it a trend? It's a social contagion. And that's one of the fears I hear, is that because we talk about it, it makes it real. I see some nice heads shaking their head. I was telling Ed earlier, there's an interesting piece of information. If you go back to the 20s and 30s and looked at the incidence of left-handedness, it was about 3 to 4% of people in the world were left-handed. It was exceedingly rare. In the 20s, if you tried to write with your left hand, what did the teacher do? Whack. Used your right. So all of a sudden, there were not many left-handers. By the 60s and 70s, when it was realized this is a brain difference, it's now about 15%. So did social contagion, did parents who were left-handed make their children left-handed? No, it's that it was acceptable now. It was allowed to let somebody express their handedness the way they were born. So I think a lot of the issues around sexual orientation, and particularly gender, that's where we are. It's now more acceptable for people to express who they are. And that's why we're seeing more of it. Are there some youth, and again, having done this for so many years, are there some youth that really are doing this as an experiment? Maybe to push the edge, just like, you know, many of us wore jeans with frayed at the bottom and smoked before we were allowed to because it was the in thing to do. Of course, there are some. But just like those phases, most of us didn't grow up in our 50s to still, you know, wear our hair the same way and have to push the envelope quite as much. If you do, great, enjoy it. But a lot of kids go through phases, and that's fine. You never want to tell them it's a phase because to them it's real and it's important. And let them express themselves. The misinformation you get is that, oh, the first time a child says, I'm not really a girl, I'm a boy, I want to go on hormones and cut off my breasts, that we're all going to do it. No. But the whole thing of House Bill 68 right now in the Senate, which says here, we're going to forbid gender affirming care, and most of what's in there is already law. as professionals, we can't do anything without a parent permission. We don't do surgery on 14-year-olds. We don't give hormones to 14-year-olds. There are so many checks and balances in the system to keep those things from happening. So that when kids are exposed to things, the research just doesn't pan out. It doesn't support that it changes their behavior. It's not affecting them in the way that the myths try to suggest. It allows them to express themselves in a way that sometimes pushes the limits, sure, and sometimes opens conversation. Sometimes it's a way of getting mom or dad to talk about things, which is never a bad thing. I do find that the hard line response from parents of "you shall never" tends to backfire. And I did bring a couple of books. I should have you pass those around if you want to. One's My Princess Boy and one's called My Shadow is Pink. They're both randomly happen to be both about little children who are born boys who have feminine behaviors. And I will say it's striking and emotional to see, I call wee ones, little ones, 4, 3, 4, 5, who are just not the gender they were born. And I mean, I've been my one story, this little person who was 3, born male, parents brought him in at 3.5, and he was extremely gifted, was reading at 3.5. Remember the old Toys R Us catalogs? We used to get the Sears catalog when I was a kid. The toy catalog came out every Christmas. As soon as he could hold a marker or a crayon, would circle all the things in the catalog that this child wanted. Every single one from 18 months was Barbie, princess, dress up, makeup, high heels, dolls, across the board. And by 3.5, when parents had forbidden him from doing dress up and whatever, had gotten extremely depressed. I've never seen a 3.5-year-old at a more depressed, clinically depressed level. And as soon as they allowed him to have dressed up clothes at home and a doll, 180 completely changed this child's personality to this bubbly, bright, happy, delightful kiddo. And that's the rarity. I've probably seen 6 kids like that in 20 years. But when they happen, you can't help but see this is not how parents raise somebody. This is how these kids are wired. And again, it's not common. That's okay. But it's not how they were raised. That in fact, parents work hard to say, I'm going to raise you as a boy, you're a boy. And not even extremely, just like we have blocks and cars. But some kids just do not gravitate to the things that match their genitals. So my view really is a lot of the hype you see about exposure and books that's going to impact kids in a negative way. If it's done right and it's not excessive and we're not giving them, confusing things, it's not going to change their views. We know that despite the fact that we all hear about peer pressure and how kids focus on peers, the research does support that most kids, when push comes to shove, they listen to their parents' views more than anything else to make decisions that are important to them, as long as there's open communication. So exposure to things opens their minds, opens their thinking, but it doesn't make them who they aren't. So I'm going to open it up. Actually, I'm right on time for discussion.
Thanks, Vanessa, for helping us wrestle with this complex subject. We're going to have a Q&A session now, and if audience members would like to receive weekly reminders of our forums, give us your contact information on a clipboard are you passing around, Jean? Yes. So you will have a clipboard coming around, and Jan will have the microphone for Q&A. I get to ask the first two.
Go for it.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch?
Well, it depends on who you are. I was probably a pretty bad witch for some people on that board.
Okay. Well, all of us have been reading, the next one, all of us have been seeing on TV and in the newspaper about parents going to school board meetings and politicians going wherever politicians go and having a fit about the literature that 10-year-olds have access to. Does anybody know anything about the effects of that, or is it all just opinion?
It is totally opinion.
You can use either way.
Yeah, it's opinion. There's no research anywhere on the effect of a 10-year-old having access to a book that has two dads as parents. My opinion is, again, the more kids can see themselves in literature, the better. There are kids in school that have two dads. There are kids in school that have two moms. There are kids in school that live with a mom and a grandma. There are kids in school that live with one dad. Why don't we have picture books and chapter books that talk about that, or that have one parent that's Black and one that's African American or Asian, one that's Indian and one that's white? Because that's what lives in our society. Having raised my kids in Shaker on purpose, that's our world. So why wouldn't you want every child to have the honor, and I think of it as an honor, of looking at a book and saying, that looks like my family. That's why we worked as a culture in the last 20, 30 years to have books that include African Americans, to have TV shows that include Black families. Because why wouldn't you want to see a family that looks like yours? It's not the be all end all, but it is so meaningful for a child to think, does nobody look like my family? So that's my view as to why it's not only not damaging, but why it's so important to have those books in our schools. I'll drop off my soapbox.
I was just going to mention, when you were talking about books, also now commercials. Every commercial you see, you very rarely see two white parents, everything is of color and of diversity. And I think that's very positive. I think more kids are looking at screens, they're looking at TVs. And this is another way that they can see themselves that doesn't seem to be getting scrutinized, at least publicly. The books are, but I think it's great that they have these commercials that
it's a great comment.
diverse.
It's kind of funny though, sometimes you'll see a commercial and it's like, okay, what are those? What are those? What are those? What are those? But that's what our culture is, and I think you're right. You're right. Nobody argues about having multiculturalism and diversity on TV. Although I will say sometimes the commercials about, feminine hygiene products and tampons and some of those, I just keep thinking if I was 13 with my boyfriend, I would have been really mortified, but maybe it's not quite that way anymore.
Problem is, young kids aren't watching commercials. They're not. We may be because we're watching shows, but they're not watching commercials. They aren't seeing them.
Yeah, they do. Although on Netflix, depending on what kind of service they have and how much they pay for it,
But they're not watching those shows. They're
Right.
watching stuff on their phone or their iPad, but they're not. My 5-year-old, who doesn't watch a lot of TV because she's not allowed. She thinks the TV is for sports. My 5-year-old saw a commercial and went, "What is this? Why is this in a show? It's in my way. And why is this here? Get rid of it, Daddy. Get rid of this thing." They don't, even at 5, they're not watching.
To be honest, I worry more about these kids' eyesight than I do about their gender.
Yeah.
When you're watching these shows on these little tiny screens. There's a question up here.
So I know of a couple who's non-binary and they had a child together. And I actually don't know these people, but I noticed it online that other people are referring to their baby as they. And the child has a non-specific, non-gender specific name. And I wonder, does that make sense to raise a child of non-binary as non-binary?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I personally have a hard time with the term they. I have a harder time with the word it. I got a couple of people want to be called it, and I just can't do that. Yeah, it just, yeah, cousin it. But I think it is difficult. Boy. I guess I can get it. But I would hope that as soon as that child starts by 2 or 3, because by 2 or 3, most kids know their gender, believe it or not. And will refer to themselves as he or she. Even if you don't teach them that, they will begin to identify internally. And I would hope that the parents would eventually let the child begin to express their gender. So that's a tough one. I don't have a good answer for you on that one.
Yeah, sort of a follow-up on that. Remember that research many years ago where people took babies into a shopping center and they're dressed in pink, they're dressed in blue, or they're dressed in orange or green. And then they studied the interaction of other people in the shopping center with those babies. And the clearly gendered babies got talked to a lot. And they got, of course, talked to in gender specific, pretty, handsome, all that kind of stuff. The green and orange babies did not get talked to nearly as much. No one knew what to do with them. And so there's the, what I think I am, but it's then how other people treat me. And I don't really have an answer for it, but I just thought that was a really interesting study.
It is very striking. And I think it shows you how much our culture likes being comfortable and having knowledge. Most of us are, especially in this room, probably information seekers. They're information avoiders and they're information seekers, personality style. And we're comfortable if we kind of know what we're walking into. You know, and if you walk up and you see the baby in pink and whatever, our brains just make little calculations and assumptions. And, you know, and sometimes you're wrong. Like you have to be a hand-me-down outfit. It's a boy. It's like, oh, okay, that's okay. I can still talk to you. You're still a cute little boy. But it does. Most of us are more comfortable. And I think that's where the challenge for parents would be is what's their comfort versus what's best for the child. And sometimes they match, sometimes they might not. And I know a lot of people, a lot of friends and family that have chosen to have greens and yellows and not be overly gendered. What's really striking is I've had so many parents who have worked so hard to raise their kids non-gendered. And they have trucks and they have dolls and they have dressed up clothes for, you know, a police outfit and a barber outfit and a princess outfit. And dang, if many kids just, no matter what they're exposed to, they pick their path. And you can push all you want, but sometimes you're not going to change the path they're on. A couple of questions over here.
Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Those who have surgery, are there those who want to return to the sex of their birth after the surgery, especially with very young people who have not yet had much life experience, but then find some difficulty in their chosen sex as opposed to their birth sex?
Yeah, I can answer that a lot. First of all, we don't do sex reassignment surgery or sex affirming surgery on children. And in fact, even young adults, it's rare before mid-20s. First of all, it's expensive and most young people can't afford it. It also takes a very long time. The only surgeries I would say I've seen done between 18 and 22 are we call top surgeries or trans guys, removing their breasts, particularly those who are very, very large chested, who probably would have chest reduction surgery anyway. But the stats are actually pretty clear. If you look at the regret rate for many surgeries where it's somewhat elective, someone chooses to have either plastic surgery for some other reason or an elective hip surgery where it's not necessary, but they're having pain, that requires a rehabilitation process. So any surgery that's not completely medically urgent. The regret rate is generally about 10 to 15%. The regret rate on studies for transgender individuals is less than 1%. So if you look just at the numbers, the outcomes are very little regret. If you ask, are they better off after surgery? It's a little higher of those who are just unhappy with it, not because of the surgery, but because they hoped that their life would be a lot better and may have had some assumptions that after surgery, I'm going to be happier, or after surgery, I'm gonna get a better job, and may have had unrealistic expectations. But would they want to go back and change their surgery? It's about 1%. My experience with my patient base, I've only known of one patient that I've seen, and I work with youth and I also consult with the adult team. There's been one patient that I know of in the 10 years we've been doing this that was unhappy with having had their gender affirming surgery. So it's very rare. But again, when you hear the piece though, that what was Senate Bill 68 trying to restrict access for kids, I mean, that would actually put me in prison. Because if I aid and abet someone by referring someone to a different state to get hormones, that would put me as a criminal. But more importantly, it stops care for these kids who we know that getting kids gender affirming care, which sometimes means just encouragement and emotional support to live in their affirmed gender, decreases suicide. It increases mental health by far. We know that kids, and one of the few reasonable studies out there actually looked at the difference between teens who have hormone transitions between 16 and 18. So they go off to college and they can path in their gender. So if I'm born girl, I start hormones at 17 with parent permission and all these checks and balances and letters and whatever, my mental health is stable. And so by going off to college, I can look like a guy. I've got little facial hair, my voice is lower, you know, I can flatten my chest enough to look like a guy. Those folks have much higher success in college and significantly better mental health than those who wait to transition until after they're 18, go off to college in not able to pass in their gender and start hormones during college. One of my views is that I would rather a child, when they've been living in their gender for 2 or 3 years, I'd rather have them start hormones when they're living at home, when their parents are there to support them through the emotional changes of that. They can see if they like what happened, if they have side effects, their mom and dad or moms and dads and grandmas are there to help them with it, and they can start college confidently rather than, oh, mom and dad refused to allow this, even though this guy has been living as a guy for 4 years, the guy's name in school and playing guy sports, but we're not going to let it happen. We're going to close our eyes and close our ears until we launch them off the college and hope that it goes okay. Right behind you there's a question.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to tell you, I have 3 children, and one of my daughters is lesbian. And she had been married to a man, but she divorced him and then married one of her bridesmaids. And when you said that you can't tell the difference between heterosexual parents and homosexual parent family, that I just want to support that. They have 2 boys, and you would not know, would not see any difference between them. And I have given gifts to my grandson. The younger boy, I gave a tractor when he was 3. He loved it so much, he took it to bed with him.
Ouch.
Yeah, right, it was a large tractor, and sharp. But a few years later, he was into dance, and I gave one of his gifts, I gave him a pink feather boa, and he just really loved that as well. I don't know how their lives will unfold, but that's the thing. They are being allowed to unfold as they wish. That's the important part.
I love it. And I wish the world was, yeah, more like that.
I was curious about, particularly grade school kids, about what's happened in the last 8 years. Because according, since my observation of my grandkids and what I've read, schools and even the kids in schools seem to be quite accepting of trans kids. Meanwhile, you have half of the politicians in a lot of the states are calling trans kids demons and disallowing healthcare, as you mentioned, and so forth. A lot different. I transitioned 33 years ago, so I went through 40 years of hiding, but that was a whole other issue. So I was just curious what if there's any information about how this is affecting kids, that duality of, you know, the way the society is
It's amazing.
responding to them.
It's amazing. If we just did what the kids do, world would be so much easier. The kids are so understanding and accepting and, you know, okay, little Johnny, you know, started out Johnny for a couple of years. And by second grade now is Judy. And they're like, okay, you know, especially during that initial pre-puberty, you know, I've had so many kids as they got older would say, you know, life was so much better for born girls. Before I had a chest, we could all run around with no shirts because nobody knows what's in your pants. Let's be honest, when you're a little kid, and you all look the same and you can play with anybody. Doesn't matter if you're a boy or girl. If I like playing with dolls, I'll play with dolls. If I like playing basketball, I'll play basketball. I don't care if that person's a boy or a girl. We just want to play and have fun, or read and have fun, or do whatever we do. And then grown-ups get involved. I mean, I love your laugh at that. Grown-ups get involved, and then the politicians get involved and make these proclamations without really looking at the people involved, because the kids are fine with it. They're so much less judgmental than we are as grown-ups. You had a passionate question.
I read a couple articles, some older and whatnot, where the children are born intersex with both male and female genitalia, or through injury, and decisions got made and they were the wrong decision. What's happening now?
It's a good question. Luckily, and I'm actually part of what's called the DSD team at the Cleveland Clinic. Not speaking for the Cleveland Clinic, but as an individual, is that now the world has finally turned in that way, so that the approach is to do as little as possible to how babies are born. So it used to be basically if you were born with what looked like a little tiny micro penis, and you had some features of male and female, or maybe you had one ovary and one testicle, but you had a micro penis, they would chop it off and raise you as a girl. The default was raising people as girls because you could make people's genitals look like girls easier than you could make them look like boys. Fortunately now, the approach has really shifted, at least as far as what guidelines that recommended is really you look at chromosomes, you look at hormone levels, and you look at genitalia, and you look at what will allow a child to grow up and decide for themselves when they're old enough and they understand it. And to see if that little person ends up being very female and is clearly gendered female, then as an adult, various plastic surgeries can be done to help them live in the gender that they are. So the approach really has shifted to one of as little intervention as possible, unless it's totally medically indicated. There are a few details I can go into, but there are certain things that are medically important, to risk of cancer and some things like that, that have to be done for infection. But generally, it's as little as possible and let the child grow up.
So my grandchild is 12, Sky. And for a year ago, Sky presented and was accepted at school as a they, them. And then this year, Sky decided to change that to she, her. And it's been a very incredible transition for all of us. And for example, Sky's in 6th grade, the choir, and she is quite a performer. And she participated in the choir in a beautiful sequin dress and was just incredibly engaged in that. And I was there a month or so before that performance for a weekend, and Sky showed all of her moves, her dance moves. And it was then that I experienced viscerally this person as a she. And it was really a wonderful experience for me to see that. And there was one other incident. I'm a little reluctant to share it in public, but I will. We love the game of draw two with this Scrabble like, and you turn your tiles over and you build an acrostic, and Sky loves it. And was doing on her own. I still make a mistake now.
We all do.
On her own, building the acrostic, and I'm there doing something else, and then I look over and I say, Sky, I have never seen that word. The word was God, G-O-C-K. And Sky was being very careful not to put a word on that wasn't valid, because she had on her tablet, she would look up any word and make sure it was valid before she used it. I said, Sky, I hadn't seen that word. Grandpa, it means girl cock. I have one of those. And to me, it was this beautiful experience.
That's wonderful. I have not heard that either.
I thought perhaps in this forum, it might be okay to say that.
All kinds of words. So we all learn, yes. Another piece about that is, I find that as soon as somebody has a personal experience, grandchild, neighbor kid, coworker who transitions, and they see the joy in that person when they get to be who they are, it just turns heads. It makes the most stubborn of us want to say, wow, you get to be who you are, and the joy that gets to you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It gets to me,
Right, yeah.
because I get, you know me long enough, I get teary for anything. I say the day I stop doing that, the day I have to retire. So, but it's very emotional. It's very visceral to see the joy of a person, whatever age they are, when they get to be genuinely themselves.
Thank you for being with us today. And my question is along the lines of my just utter aghastness at our politicians, how cruel they are to this, beautiful but very vulnerable population. It's just astounding to me that adults can be so horrible. Based on your experience in Geauga County mental health board, or any other things you can pull on in your hat as an activist, is there anything that you can share with us that would help us support healthier and more sane policies and working with these people that are making decisions that have life-altering, life trajectory consequences?
I wish I had the magic answer. Like I said, I worked hard for 8 months with the county board, and I was also in the middle of having cancer and cancer treatment, and I just couldn't emotionally tolerate the craziness. Be as active as you can. If you have families who have kids in school, push them to go to those board meetings and be a voice of sanity. A lot of what's happening in board meetings is there's a group of people who actually go from board to board. They don't even live in that school district, not even in the county. And profess to be experts. One of them I outed at know from my work in this field, my patients, there's about a dozen proponent testimony. People who are saying we should do this, and they're mostly false organizations. One is called the American Society for Pediatrics. It has about 10 members who are not part of the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's the splinter group. They use these strange names like the Association of Psychology in America, not our national organization, but they use these names that make you think they're legitimate organizations. And you look at their websites, and they have like 10 people. And they're pretty extreme, not professionals. But there's about 10 proponent testimonies, mostly by these same handful of people who go to board meetings. Jonathan Broadbent's one of them. There's a number of folks in the area. And then the opponent testimony, one of which was mine, there's about 75. But yet that bill got passed in the House. But if you just read some of the opponent testimonies, they're passionate. And I sat there and cried the other day because I hadn't read through all of them. This was last year. I read some of them. And they're passionate pleas for sanity and for doing good care and just not getting in the way. Let the other side will say parents need to have the right to raise their children the way they want to. I agree, disagree with that. But let all of us raise our kids the way we want. Don't make us raise our kids the way you want. And that's the point I think we need to keep hammering to the legislators is listen to your constituent. This is not about that. This is all about their politics. And I want to be hopeful, and I want to leave you with a hopeful sense. And I think the fact that you're here and the way you're talking about this is hopeful. I will say, being raised in a very blue collar, very small town family that was always very open. I mean, we had an African-American doctor, family doctor from the time I was born that delivered me and was our family doctor. And so we were very non-racially biased, but my dad was a hillbilly in his own words and, pretty old fashioned about things. And when my daughter came out as lesbian in high school and brought her girlfriend over, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be awful. Grandpa's going to freak out. And he's just like, oh, hey, hi, cool. You look happy. Where'd you come from? And then we came over with a guy the next year. He's like, hey, hi, you're happy. I think people are real, and if we let people run their own lives and not muck them up by interfering, be a lot better off. So,
Good note.
thank you for being a great audience.
And everybody was so attentive. Except, Laurie, I thought for a minute you were going to ask her, did she have a way to make politicians sane? And people don't often ask for miracles in the Unitarian Church. So I thought I should remind you of that. Anyway, our next 9 a.m. forum will be on December 3rd on the post-election political landscape in Ohio. The speaker will be Cherie Strachan, who's the director of the Bliss Institute of Applied Politics at the University of Akron. You're all welcome to attend our 10:15 a.m. Sunday service, either upstairs in the sanctuary or on our YouTube page. And the theme today is feeding one another, and we'll have a traditional bread ceremony. To see what else is happening in the congregation, check out our website at uucleveland.org. And thanks again for joining us. Have a great week. Thank you.